Good morning and welcome. I'm Raleigh Flynn, the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, a nonpartisan think tank based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This morning, I'm really thrilled that we're going to have a conversation about the future of Somalia. And so I'm looking forward to that conversation. And we have here with us this morning to lead our discussion, Ambassador Charles Ray. Charles Ray is a member of our Board of Trustees, as well as the chair of our Africa program. He has also twice served as an ambassador to the Republic of Zimbabwe and the Kingdom of Cambodia. He was also the first U.S. Consul General in Ho Chi Minh City. Besides his long career with the U.S. Department of State and the Foreign Service, he also had a 2-decade career with the U.S. military, and he also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for POW and Missing Personnel Affairs. Joining him this morning, we have Abdiaziz Maahaay, Abdi, who is the CEO and president of Somali American Healthcare Foundation. He's well known throughout Somali and the worldwide Somali diaspora for his 2 decades long effort providing comprehensive health care services throughout Somalia. He's also the former president and CEO of Somali American Healthcare Foundation. He was given awards such as the Person of the Year 2007 by Hiran Online. He's been interviewed by CNN, Al Jazeera, and a number of other outlets. Joining him is Dr. Ken Menkhaus, who is professor of political science at Davidson College. He specializes in Somalia and the Horn of Africa, widely published, and his work involves both academic research and policy work for the U.S. government, the United Nations, the World Bank, and non-government organizations. About halfway through the program, we're going to be going to your questions, so I strongly encourage you to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll also be having some maps, links to maps in the chat for those of you who would like to reacquaint yourselves with the geography of the Horn of Africa. And as I say, we'll be going to your questions halfway through, but please start putting them in now because sometimes we draw on those in the course of the conversation as well. So without further ado, I forgot to say a thank you to our sponsors and supporters. And of course, an encouraging word to those of you who aren't yet in one of those categories to consider becoming a member of those categories. We can't do this work without you, so please consider supporting us. Without further ado, I'll turn the reins over to Ambassador Ray.
Thank you, and I'd like to echo the welcome to all of you. Somalia has not been very prominently featured in American media, and those of us who follow Africa probably sometimes wonder why. Not since Black Hawk Down have Americans paid much attention to what happens in Somalia, which is rather unfortunate. And hopefully our 2 panelists today can fill in some of the knowledge gaps that we have about this country that could very well be significant in terms of security in the coming decades, particularly with the incident just yesterday of 2 car bombs in Somalia and a large number of casualties in the very short term. With the administration's decision to send U.S. forces back into Somalia to help the government there deal with its extremism problem, it is a matter of concern, I think, to all Americans. You've heard the introduction, the credentials of our 2 speakers, and so without further ado, I would like to ask first Mr. Maahaay if he would make a few remarks, and then Professor Menkhaus, and after that we'll go into our discussion. Mr. Maahaay.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Charles Ray. Thank you, everyone who's listening. Good morning to you, all of you from Rochester, Minnesota. First, my gratitude goes to those who organized today this event and their leadership, members of Foreign Policy Research Institute initiative. Inviting me also to Ambassador Ray, I want to thank you for your service in military. And then also I want to thank you, Ambassador Ken Menkhaus for putting a lot of knowledge to Somalia. And thank you so much for all of you joining with me. My name is Abdiaziz Maahaay. I'm American Somali living over 29 years in the United States. I started going back to Somalia since 21 years ago. I've been going back to Somalia for doing humanitarian work. And with the generosity of American doctors, and we have able to help Somali who needs medical attention, sent some of them to Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and the most challenging case to bring to America, especially. And I want to thank to Mayo Clinic leadership and University of Minnesota and Massachusetts General Boston Hospital for separating conjoined twins 2 times. So the generosity of Mayo Medical Mission, the generosity of Massachusetts General Hospital, and some other hospital, I want to thank you very much. As you know, Somali has been having difficulty for the last decade for political experience in climate change, including war on terror, including an extremist control area. People are living within chaos for the last decade. As you know, in the global climate change, Somalia has been affected several droughts and without the lack of rain in those regions in Somalia, especially the area they were occupied with extremists. Some of the Somali farmers has been having difficulty to live and do their farmers due to the higher taxation and asking ransom money for livestock, and then also bringing to their children to the members of fighters of Al-Shabaab. I think Somalia is having this issue of global climate change and war on terrorists has significant impact to Somalia, health issues, and then especially mental issues, especially those areas who are occupied extremists today. Some of the area has been liberated to the area in Hirshabelle and Galmudug, 80% or 90% today, those are liberated. And those are the people who are looking right now real help, because it has been affected for 20 years of abuse of climate, abuse of human abuse of children, abuse of and sending terrorists to detonate themselves. Those are the areas that right now the government, Somalis, needs to be reached out. And Somali government cannot do alone this climate change and disaster affecting Somali people. We need to make right investment of global and environmental security, including tools to educate the Somali young who doesn't know anything about an environmental issue and then war on terrorists. I would like to also include my, when the president started his office in May 2000, he served, he had several campaign promises. One of them was to start war on terrorists. And then second was to establish climate change, and then also to forgive the loans Somalia owed to the IMF and World Bank. Those are one of the top his priority. And today, most of the area has been liberated, has been having problem with an area in Hirshabelle and Galmudug. Extremists has been covering wells in those areas. So it will be great to have tools that can be served to those people right now. International community, Somalia alone cannot do this work. It needs to be attention for the international community to reach out those in those. I will with my last discussion saying that Somalia has the opportunity now, and the world needs to be invested, and especially in this time of has been liberated those areas who needs help or reconstruction.
Thank you, Professor Menkhaus.
Thank you very much. I echo Dr. Maahay's gratitude for joining all of you this morning. We've been asked to talk about or address the question of where Somalia is heading. You know, that involves both trend analysis and looking at existing trends, and speculating as to whether they'll continue or not, and then thinking a little bit about potential tipping points that could move the country in either a more positive or negative direction. And so what I'd like to do is throw out a few ideas just to get the conversation started very broadly about trends in Somalia that we think that we are seeing. I'll start with humanitarian. You've already heard Dr. Maahaay, I think, make the case very convincingly that the very severe drought that has gripped Somalia this past year and a half or 2 years has pushed the country to the brink of famine. The UN has actually said last month that the country seems to be averting outright famine, but that's the distinction without a difference for people living on the ground. I mean, the level of excess mortality is very high. The stress on livelihoods and households is extremely high. And what we've been seeing is this is a recurring problem and a worsening problem that we strongly suspect is linked to climate change. And it's making livelihoods, both pastoral and agricultural livelihoods in Somalia, increasingly non-viable. And what that's done is it's produced massive levels of displacement of destitute rural dwellers into Somali cities, which are exploding in size. Mogadishu, Somalia in general, has gone from an almost exclusively rural country to one of the most urban countries in East Africa in the span of a generation. 4% growth rates in Mogadishu. Most of that is urban drift from the countryside. And that has lots of implications for livelihoods, for sustainability of households across Somalia. Next, conflict trends. Conflict is not disattached from the strains of drought and climate change. As we continue to see lots and lots of localized conflict over resources across Somalia, in some cases intensifying as communities are struggling to access pasture and water. What we have not seen is a return to the level of civil war that some of us may recall from the early 1990s. But it's low-level conflict that involves both communal clashes, in some cases political clashes, and in other cases ongoing violence related to terrorism and counterinsurgency between the government and al-Shabaab and the U.S. forces that are training and advising those government forces, as well as the African Union peacekeeping forces there. The economy in Somalia overall, it has seen some impressive growth in the large urban areas. Parts of Mogadishu are almost unrecognizable with all the real estate development and new businesses, and that looks really good, and it is. But one of the things that those of us who follow the Somali political economy worry about is whether it's sustainable. Most of the growth in Somalia has been driven by foreign aid, which constitutes the majority of the budget for the government. The government's budget has gone up from like $100 million to almost $1 billion this year, the new budget. That's impressive, but it's mostly foreign aid, and that may or may not be sustainable. A lot of the business investments in Somalia are coming from the very large Somali diaspora that has done very well around the world, that has savings and is going back to Somalia to invest. But we worry about that as well because the diaspora is aging. It's harder for Somalis to get abroad than it used to be. So it's not as easy for the country to replenish its diaspora. And second generation, third generation Somali Americans, Somali Canadians, and others may or may not be as committed to sending money back in the form of remittances to their families for basic livelihoods or for business investments. So the sustainability issue is, I think, an ongoing concern there. In terms of politics, the trend has been ongoing political paralysis in the government, ongoing standoff between the central government or the federal government and the federal member states. Somalia is a federated state, but the terms of federalism have not been worked out yet. There is still no permanent constitution. So the power struggle between the federal member states and the central government has been pronounced and dysfunctional. And the political settlement that brought the country together after years of complete state collapse. It's a fragile political settlement between elites that has frayed badly in recent years. Now, we have seen some recovery of that with the new administration of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, but it's taken a real beating, and so that, you know, where that political settlement is heading is, I think, a really important indicator that we're all watching very closely. As for violent extremism, Al-Shabaab it has been weakened. The new administration has made a strong commitment to eliminating Al-Shabaab. We've also seen the rise, a spontaneous rise of local militia called the Maoiste. Thank you. I've got a Maoiste. I was trying to remember the word. The Maoiste. These are basically clan militia that have risen up in response to frustration at Al-Shabaab predation that Dr. Maahaay has already talked about, the forced recruitment and the taxation. So Al-Shabaab's on its heels, and that's good news. But it's really important to remember that Al-Shabaab still has a very powerful network called the Amniyat that has insinuated itself throughout Somali society, Somali government. It is capable of these recurring terrorist attacks across the country, and is not going to go away altogether. It has also learned how to very successfully exploit clanism in Somalia. It's doing so now to try to break the coalitions that are forming against it. Let me end by just talking about a few tipping points, because it's easy to just say, well, here have been the trends, therefore those will continue in Somalia, but that may not always be the case. A couple of important potential tipping points: the large 21,000 person African Union peacekeeping force that has been helping to protect key installations in Somalia is already redeploying slowly, and it's going to be replaced in full by the Somali National Army, we're told, in 2 years. The Somali National Army is currently not in any position to take responsibility over from AMISOM. It is still a largely clan-based, clan-divided security force, and so getting command and control and professionalization of the Somali National Army is a very high priority, and that's one of the reasons that we've got advisors, military advisors, back on the ground there to try to promote that process. I worry about donor fatigue and donor preoccupation with other parts of the world, whether it's the so-called Asian pivot for the U.S. or global preoccupation with the crisis in Ukraine. If Somalia starts to slip on donor priorities, again, the sustainability issue of the budget and development funds comes into play. And then we all worry a lot about drought, the recurring drought, and if we're seeing long-term climate change, how viable livelihoods are going to be across rural Somalia. I'll end with one other tipping point, just to broaden the conversation a little bit, and that is Somalia lives in a really interesting neighborhood. And so events and trends in neighboring states matter a great deal, and particularly neighboring Ethiopia, which is going through its own turbulence right now. Whatever directions Ethiopia ends up taking will have substantial impact on Somalia as we look into the near future. I'll stop there.
Thank you both. Very interesting. Before we get to see what our audience is interested in, I have a few questions of my own I'd like to run by you. The recently concluded U.S.-African Leaders Summit here in Washington talked a lot about building partnerships with the countries of Africa. Somalia had a delegation there. And I'd like, starting with you, Professor Menkhaus, and then you, Dr. Maahaay, how do you see the commitments from the Leaders Summit being implemented in Somalia?
That's a very interesting question. The partnership message and model was indeed emphasized in the summit. In the case of Somalia, it's particularly important because as a previously failed state, now a fragile state, it is often on the receiving end of a lot of global advice and guidance that can feel controlling and not a partnership at all. And so finding a way to increase the genuine nature of that partnership is going to be really important in Somalia. It's very important for Somalis to feel that they are partners and not simply recipients with lots of strings attached for the foreign aid. The challenge in Somalia is that the state remains quite fragile. Its capacities are really limited. It is thin, both vertically and horizontally. That is to say, it doesn't have much depth or capacity to deliver services, and it doesn't really extend its authority into much of the countryside at this time. And that forces external partners sometimes to end up partnering with the sub-state actors, the federal member states, and that gets us embroiled right away in the tensions, the ongoing tensions over the power struggles between the federal member states and the central government. That's been a delicate dance for external actors like the U.S. for over a decade now.
Dr. Maahaay?
Yeah, I would like to add one thing before an delegate came here, and the president came and met and Secretary of Defense and Mr. Austin. And one of the key issues that we have seen, the commitment of American troops putting a lot of pressure to war and terror, was one of the significant improvements right now. As you can see, the Somali has been gaining for, especially including with Somali armies, including within help within the United States military, including with the Menkhaus group and local community, has been gaining in momentum on the ground. And as you can see, 90% of the region of the two states, and Galmudug and Hirshabelle, has been separated and liberated from the extremist group. This is one of the effective that we can see the United States war on terror is improving. As you remember, and the previous president and Donald Trump has pulled back in the military, and that has been weakening in the Somali capability to fight with an extremist. And the second point that I want to mention is the meeting that the Washington, D.C. seems effective. And then I can see one of the promises the United States has been promising to all the nations of Africa. If they were done and then reach out the way it has been done, it will improve the Somali livelihood, especially the droughts keep coming back. It's affecting the Somali, especially in half of population now and affected by the climate change and the droughts. And then also, not only that, also in my perspective of psychological impact and mental health issue, those areas was affecting the Somali people. And as we see, as the extremists leave in regions, what they were covering was the wells that people were using to drink water. So the livelihood right now, the ground that I'm talking about right now, the Hirshabelle and some of the area that has been liberated, the extremists, and needing to be faced right away, and I need right help from the impact has been facing for 20 years of occupation of extremists. That will help if the climate change, if we cover the droughts, if we build the military momentum, I think Somalia will head the right direction.
Thank you. An interesting point that both of you sort of brought up is this urbanization of Somalia, which is actually an issue across the continent, but I didn't realize that it was quite as acute as you bring out. This creates, I think, sort of problems. On one hand, you probably won't, the urbanization probably cannot be reversed. So I guess I have two questions. One is how is the government dealing with adaptation of the urban environment so that you don't have this issue you have in some countries where people leave the countryside to escape the effects of climate change, and they go into slums in the cities that are ill-prepared, and they face sometimes worse impacts. And certainly, with so much of the rural population leaving the land, even if, how are you dealing? I mean, how's the government dealing with the issue of food security? Because you have to have a certain amount of a rural population to create, to produce food. That's two rather incoherent questions, but I mean, it's an issue that the government of Somalia has to face. How do you see that? How do you see these two problems being addressed? Professor Maahaay and then Professor Menkhaus.
And thank you, and Ambassador Ray. And as Dr. Menkhaus mentioned, the urbanization in Somalia right now, if you go to Mogadishu, I just came back to Mogadishu, you will see millions of people are coming from the rural area. They left their farmers, they left the livestock, they bring even livestock to them in Somalia, especially in Mogadishu. What causing was the extremists has been putting a lot of pressure of, and either you pay higher taxation of your livestock, either if you farm, you will pay higher taxation of your farm. So the farm industry was not even capable of having farmers. So this will need a resettlement, big resettlement, because there are so many IDP camps in Mogadishu right now that has been bring people to come to near to the cities. So those people need to go back, and then they're farmers. And that's what I'm thinking about in the resettlement, and then also in putting those people in microfinancing to encourage to go back and then do their farmers. That's the only way to, and that's our, I'm guessing, the only way to rebuild that area is to send back those people, their farmers. Because urbanization right now in Mogadishu is so many people, so many IDP camps, and these are coming because of the conflict of extremists and the climate change.
Professor Menkhaus.
For your audience interested in urbanization issues in Somalia, I would point you to, and I'll share the link subsequently, to a new World Bank study that was quite comprehensive on urbanization issues in Somalia, with all the data that you would want. That study framed the Somali urbanization issue as both an opportunity and a crisis. The opportunity is with the rapid growth of Somali cities, especially Mogadishu and Hargeisa, but even once little villages like Bosaso that now has 250,000 plus people, just in the past 30 years. There are opportunities. People have better access to services, to education, to higher incomes, opportunities, and those are all things that the World Bank was looking at to try to find ways to let's harness these cities as anchors of development in Somalia. How can we help make the cities real anchors of development? But they recognize threats as well. One was the enormous size of these internally displaced persons camps, and the misery of those camps that many of them have been forcibly relocated to the outskirts of Mogadishu. And an important point here is that there's two different types of displacement from the rural sector into the urban areas. One is by individuals who come from major clans. They'll be absorbed into their extended family. They're not considered IDPs or internally displaced persons. But then you've got Somalis from the historically marginalized agricultural clans like the Digomorefle or the Somali Bantu minority. When they come in, they are considered IDPs, and IDP carries a label in Somalia that essentially means you don't really belong here. You don't have rights. And that's really important as Somalis continue to grapple with this whole issue of identity, rights, and citizenship in a federal system. Where federalism has come to be understood implicitly as zones of exclusive clan rights. So this area is for our clan. We have rights to jobs, to land, to political power. You can live here, but as a guest. And so the status of those IDPs who are coming in, driven by climate change and conflict, the long-term status of those is going to be a major political issue for Somalis to try to unravel. The other major threat the World Bank looked at with regard to rapid urbanization is land disputes. Urban land disputes are endemic. They are lethal. There is no legal system that is really managing it well. Somalis turn sometimes to customary authorities to try to broker disputes over land. There's a lot of land grabbing. Sometimes Somalis are turning to Al-Shabaab, which has a pretty strong reputation as an arbiter of land disputes, and they enforce their rulings. But all that to say is that the Somali cities are really a potential opportunity, but they also face really significant threats. Your question about food security, I can answer quickly, and that is in the countryside, most of the population engages in subsistence agricultural pastoralism. So they're, to the extent that their livelihoods are viable, they're feeding themselves, typically with low-value crops or with meat and milk. However, the larger and larger urban population is almost exclusively dependent on food imports, and so that really puts an enormous pressure on the diaspora to send remittances back so that those households have enough money to buy the wheat or the spaghetti or the rice that they're buying from abroad. Somalia is not, and is nowhere close to being self-sufficient in food. And I don't foresee that happening. Right now, the best, and for a long time, the best land, the irrigable land along the rivers, has been mainly alienated for cash crop production, which can earn some interesting, it's not a bad thing, it earns some hard currency, but what it doesn't do is provide food security.
Well, thank you. I have one other question before we go to the audience, and this goes back to the comment, I forget which of you made it, about the fact that the fight against the Al-Shabaab is increasingly being conducted by clan-based militias. And when you use that term, it immediately brought into my head images of Somalia of the 1990s, where you had the clan armies. Do you see that as a potential problem beyond Al-Shabaab? I mean, unless somehow the government can think of a way to create an umbrella that covers all of these different clans, are we not looking at the potential for one problem to be replaced by another? Professor Menkhaus.
Exactly. This is that you put it very well. This is a solution that's going to create a new problem. And the question is, it's going to create a bigger problem than the one that they just solved. I don't know the answer, but I can tell you every Somali and every external observer of Somalia is concerned with this. Once mobilized, the clan militia will remain in place and will start to fight with one another. And then the question is, can the government absorb them into the wider Somali security sector? Well, it's already an enormous security sector. It's very costly. Most of the budget is going to defense. So that's problematic from a sustainability point of view. So yeah, there are real concerns that this could be, this could solve one problem and create another one.
Dr. Maahaay, you'd like to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I would like to say one thing. And we have seen this movement of clan militia and Mausley. And with the effect of so many years that has been doing for bring your child, give me money, ransom, give me a weapon, people have been tired of for that being long time. There is one gentleman who said, no, it will not, it's going to happen. It's not going to happen to my child. And he is the one who started. It's called Dasser, Mr. Dasser. Mr. Dasser died fighting with this extremist. The reason he died today and was to make sure that he uprise to what's going to happen in the ground. The way it goes right now is every clan militia base has to liberate their own territories. Most of right now, the way you see it in Hiran, the way you see in Hirshabelle, was liberated by their own clan base, those people who are living in the area. I think it's also based on clan leaders and also the imams and also the effect of tribe leaders, not only on the military side, but also was, Somali said, no more. The tribe said, no more Al-Shabaab. Those are the ones affected. And we don't know what's going to happen unless we have to create. We remember we went to Iraq and we just created problems. We didn't have a solution right away. You know, right now, government of Iraq is working officially. And I think I will hope the Somali will do the same thing and they can learn about what happened the way in Iraq war started. So, that's what I'm thinking. The right move will start if the government puts the new military who just came back from Eritrea to those people, like almost 5,000 to 4,000 militaries. Those are, I think, Somali military who has been trained well, plus the American trained military who has a capability to do well in Somali in army services. I think if that government realized and organized what's going to happen next, it will make easier.
Thank you. And now, President Flynn, we will turn it over to questions from the audience.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of good questions, so I'm going to start pretty much in the order in which they were submitted. We have a question, and I'm going to throw this to Dr. Maahaay. Recent reports indicate a rise of substance abuse and addiction among women in Somalia. And a second question we'll tie in with is what is the state of abuse affecting women and girls in Somalia?
I think the right question was, we have seen so many abuses on drugs that comes from different country apart. We have seen so many issues of those effects of young and adults between age of 16 to 25 to 30. You will see those effects because of youth unemployment. Also, some of them doesn't have a job. And I think the abuse also comes on and some of the part of radicalization was we have seen so many abuses that women would be taken away from their husband or something like that. We have seen so many issues. But the government of Somalia has been targeting in some cases that we have seen and on the social media that has been put some young children has been abusing. The government has been targeting those kind of cases. I've seen some police members have catch those who are doing for putting risk on young women and kids who are and young age. We have seen some high risk, but I'm worrying about the drug abuse of the epidemic increase now.
And what sort of drugs are we talking about?
Well, some of them, there's injection of drugs, opiums, and some comes from India, some comes from different parts of around the world. High abuse of drugs.
Another question we have, the new Somali government is focused on security, but also economic development through the HIPC debt relief process. Do you see Somalia being able to meet the conditions and reach completion point in the next 5 years? Dr. Menkhaus, would you like to take that? And could you tell us just a little bit about the HIPC debt relief process as well?
I could, but I am not an expert on that at all. I'll tell you what I know, and that is that Somalia has qualified for debt relief. That was just last year, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it was last year, or possibly the year before, where it had a substantial debt that was negotiated with the multilateral donors, and that was considered a major victory because it then enabled Somalia to qualify for new grants and loans from the World Bank and the IMF. I am not in a position though to talk about the 5-year debt relief process that you've just asked me about. I'm sorry.
Okay. Dr. Maahaay, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think the government of Somalia is trying to get debt relief in order to have investment in the future. And they're trying very hard. As Dr. Menkhaus say, I have no further details, what they have discussed or what they have not. But then the government of Somalia will like to have those forgiving loans in order to have investment.
Okay. We have a couple questions about the military. Regarding al-Shabaab control and the lack of road travel, even in locations as close as Baidoa and Mogadishu, is the reestablishment of road travel a priority of the military to reduce the reliance on air travel and open means of travel, connection to market systems, etc.? Dr. Menkhaus, anything to say about that, road travel?
It's absolutely a high priority. The roads are the major source of revenue for al-Shabaab. The road taxes that they collect are a very substantial part of their revenue. Robbing them of that revenue will weaken the organization further, freeing up transit corridors so that taxes don't have to be paid, and so that the security risks are dropped, are going to be critical for reintegrating the country. Right now, as your question implies, most Somali political leaders have to fly to get to anywhere because the roads are simply not yet safe.
Yeah.
Dr. Maahaay, anything to add to that?
And one of the things I want to add is, the infrastructure of Somalia, its needs really high in the focus for Somali government. The roads has been built since long time ago, and the connection between two especially close area has not been built. And this will help in order to become Somali connected to each other, connected in Baidoa or either Kismayo or either to go all the way to Bosaso. We need to rebuild the roads in Somalia, because this road has been not rebuilt for a long decade of years. The infrastructure of Somalia needs to be to build the roads. That's number one. And secondly, in order to have business coming to the cities, it will have the farmers to come easy way to bring in their foods to bring to the cities.
And another question, al-Shabaab will not be defeated through military means alone. A statement and a question. Will not be defeated through military means alone. Are the FGS or any of the federal member states improving governance and service delivery for the public, including the areas liberated from al-Shabaab control? Dr. Maahaay, would you like to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, and there is several issues going on. The extremists where they liberate right now. People are visiting because of state members of Somali federal government are going back to their regions and visiting places that they haven't seen for 20 years due to the liberated area. We have seen so many impacts that people are traveling from the United States to go back and see in places that they haven't seen for family, they haven't seen mother, they haven't seen. I have seen one of my friends who left it here who haven't seen his mother 21 years and visit to those places, area that has been liberated. And those areas has been liberated needs so many developments, the psychological impacts, and it needs to be rebuilt in the governmental level, education level. We have seen so many less educated because of the undercover of the extremists that not allowing to education to be allowed those regions. It needs to be regained of momentum. Those children needs to go back to regular education to clean radicalization has been put to their heads. The child who was born 20 years ago in those areas, now he only knows extremists only because it is what has been taught.
Anything to add, Dr. Menkhaus?
Well, just to comment on the first point of the question comment, I think most of us do understand that al-Shabaab will not be militarily defeated outright. The question has always been when is the moment right for some kind of negotiated settlement? And the argument has been that we need to weaken al-Shabaab to a point where it's willing to come to the table. Right now, or up until recently, al-Shabaab has said there's nothing to negotiate. We control most of the countryside. You know, Amisom is going to leave soon. We're gonna win. We're going to take over. Finding that moment that is right for negotiation is going to be the really tough question, because you could also make the case that the government won't necessarily want to negotiate when it's in a position of strength. I don't know where that moment is, but when it comes, that's going to be a very, very important process for the international community to carefully support. And I would, I'm sorry, if I could just add that there's also, you know, I think for people who aren't familiar with Somalia, you might think, oh my gosh, how could they ever live together? How could they ever work together? Actually, al-Shabaab is so closely integrated into Somali society. There's so many people who move back and forth freely between al-Shabaab and the government. There are families that have one kid in al-Shabaab and one in the civil service. Somalia is a very pragmatic society, and they could work this out when the time is right.
Yeah, that to me raises a really interesting question, which is how effective at actual governance is al-Shabaab? Either of you.
Okay, and al-Shabaab is complicated, and I think in the rise of the government will never win if they wouldn't have the support of the local the clans. If this continues of you know, the extremists, the way they dealt with with the local people who used to welcome, but now there's no more welcoming. And the only way I think they will be, the only way they can have momentum is to come back is to have shown what they showed before. You know, the first time they show that they are very justice and they are very loyal, and then until people say no more.
Yeah.
So I don't think so that in a region where they will come back, because the local militia and tribes have now capacity to fight, has a capacity to say, you don't come my territory. So I don't think they will have power again, but they still exist.
We haven't talked much about the role of the U.S. military, and if, you know, the Amazon is going to phase out in 2 years. What are the prospects of the Somali National Army being able to maintain the peace? Dr. Menkhaus.
Yeah, it's a worry. It's a real worry. The Somali National Army has to date not been effective. It has been organized largely around clan-based brigades that don't always answer to one another or to up a chain of command. There's high levels of corruption in the military, a lot of ghost soldiers, a lot of diverted resources, to the point where our State Department even suspended aid to the Somali Army a few years ago because of the gross levels of corruption. We do have some areas of real hope. Special forces that have been developed in the Somali security sector, Danab, is very effective, very professional, and that is the group that is most directly supported by the U.S. military. The challenge is first to expand Danab's capacity nationally in a way that transcends clan. And then secondly, build out the wider security sector. And here, I think one of the things that's important to remind ourselves of is we talked about the Somali security sector and almost exclusively focus on the army. But the reality is most of Somalia's political challenges and security challenges are policing. And so the Somali police are another area that needs substantial support. Right now, very few people go to the police. If you go to the police, you run the risk of being held until your family members pay a bribe to get you out. It's not good. But But we've got 2 years, we're on the clock to try to really turn that around. And if we don't, the Somali government is going to be much more exposed, and even a weakened al-Shabaab could do a lot of damage.
I think the right investment on, as Dr. Menkhaus said, to train the Somali capacity military, especially like done up, and to train more in the capacity is still an American involvement was away for a while. And now after Biden administration has been sent back to the American troops, you can see the improvement. But what we need right now is to rebuild not only the military, as Dr. Menkhaus said, also to American to train the Somali police, to train effective. And also, and as international community, we have seen the UAE has been training Somali militaries, and we have seen Qatar, we have seen the involvement of Turkeys, and those needs to be stepping out since African troops are leaving, the Amazon troops are leaving. And one of the things I want to be very proud to be Somali and Somalian is to tell is that the war right now affecting the Somalis who are liberated in those areas was mainly Mausle and the Somali militaries. Because the capacity of the training Somali has been improving for since the last 6-7 years has been improving. If we continue to invest the right investment, right now Amazon troops are paid much higher than Somali soldiers. And so if we invest in Somali militaries, I think it will be having right capacity to control the Somali.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Tying together a couple questions, and you started to touch on it. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the foreign involvement, Turkey's involvement, Qatar, UAE, even China. China, is there a role, a larger role for China to play in economic and military development? So let's talk about, some of the neighbors as well as foreign influences. Dr. Menkhaus?
I would organize the external actors in 3 concentric circles. You've got the immediate neighbors, you've got the regional neighbors, and then you've got the wider so-called international community. The immediate neighbors of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Kenya play a very important role in Somalia. And what's been significant here is the dramatic shift in regional relations since 2018, when Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia realigned Ethiopian foreign policy to create strong relations with the president of Eritrea and the then president of Somalia. That was a sea change, because up to that point, Ethiopia had committed itself to supporting the federal member states in Somalia and a weak federal government. It preferred a weak central government in Somalia. It flipped on that. Meanwhile, Kenya has been supporting more of the federal approach, at least in Jubaland, the area that abuts Kenya. These countries will have been both part of the solution and both part of the problem in Somalia, but cannot be ignored. They have existential interests in spillover from Somalia, as well as some economic opportunities in Somalia. The next concentric circle of the regionals, the wider region, the Gulf states and Turkey, they are the so-called new actors now, the new donors in Somalia, playing a very robust role in everything from economic development aid to port contracts, to military training. The problem there is not that they're in Somalia. The problem is they're working across purposes. We've seen proxy wars essentially waged between Qatar and the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates in Somalia, and this is something they've been playing out across the wider region. That's been very unhelpful in Somalia and needs to be resolved. As for China, China has had much less involvement in Somalia compared to its very deep economic ties in Kenya and Ethiopia. We're all waiting to see if and when China starts to become more active. I should have added Djibouti too, where it now has a seaport and naval rights. But so far, China has had a relatively minor role in Somalia. It is a major trade partner because it's the largest manufacturing economy in the world. So it has that role. But to date, it has kept its powder dry in Somalia. I look forward to seeing what Dr. Maahaay thinks about that, though. I know we're all wondering about China and Somalia.
Okay.
Before an African summit was happening here in Washington, D.C., the African, mostly Arabs, have met China in Saudi Arabia. And we have known China for many years, that they have built roads in Kenya, they have built in ports in Kenya. And then I don't see any movement that right now is going on. What we're looking for right now is Somalia looking for direction of investment. Somalia has a big business tie with the UAE and Qatar and those regions in the Middle East, especially in Saudi Arabia, who have they send livestock to Somalia, from Somalia. And those are things we are looking right away because of the economical impact of Somalia. It's related to UAE and Saudi Arabia, and those are two keys. And then if Saudis and UAE invest Somali military, and as I told before, and we have seen in previous time, UAE has trained so many capacity military in Somalia, and I'm looking forward to that in Turkey and in Qatar to be involved right away into Somalia, because leaving an AMISOM troops will create more problem. I think His Excellency President Hassan has the time to reach out those countries and say, we need military capacity, especially as Dr. Menkhaus mentioned and the police training would be effective, especially if American agents, or maybe American troops will be involving the way DUNAP they have trained the capacity, and also train about the prosecution and train about the law and justice in the police sector.
Thank you. We have just 3 minutes left, maybe a little less, but I can't resist asking a couple of these provocative questions. So I'll need quick answers though. And one of them is pursuit of a unitary Somali state a fool's errand? For 3 decades, the clans have undermined creation of a unitary state. Prior to that, the Somali state was held together by a military dictatorship that united Somalis by focusing on an external enemy, Ethiopia. Why not focus efforts toward creating clan-based mini-states? This approach seems to be working in Somaliland. Dr. Maahaay.
I don't think so, and we don't have to go back, and we don't have to go back clan patient. And we remember, as I grew up in those times in Somalia, the clan basis is not going to work. And then right now, the government of Somalia, you will see the military for different places, different parts of the region have been pulled together. The military has been put together right now, and it's working right now. It's effective, it's working. What I would like to see is right now is more investment to Somalia to have an environmental impact to be helped in those areas has been effective for the war. What I would like to see also is to be Somalia to be united for itself, and I think if the sanction was lifted to Somalia, I think it will be they have a capable Somali army to defend their country.
Okay, Dr. Menkhaus.
Any move toward a clan-based breakup of Somalia would not solve the problem in Somalia. It would just replicate it at the local level. The real challenge is for Somalis to solve the problem of rights, identity, and citizenship, what they call in Somali, udashe, rights by blood, rights by birth. Who has the right to live where? If they can solve that, the whole federalism issue and the clan issue will resolve itself, but that has not been done to date.
Okay. One more last, very provocative. We have 1 minute left. Why do we persist in the belief that civil wars such as Somalia can only end with a negotiated settlement? Post-World War II has places like Bosnia, Lebanon, has led to more instability and renewed internal conflict. This is the writer, only civil wars that end in victory on one side or the other, Vietnam, Greece, has led to permanent stability. We should look at these lessons. Are there lessons here for Somalia?
I don't think so, because of this country doesn't know anything about tribal issues. It doesn't know anything about the way people living. Comparing those areas, Somalia will be, I don't think
okay.
it will be.
Okay, Dr. Menkhaus?
Yeah, I don't disagree that outright victory tends to result in more durable peace, a victor's peace. But in this case of Somalia, we've got no choice. Shabab is too embedded in Somali society. Think of it more as a network and not as a discrete army. And you'll understand why there has to be some kind of negotiated settlement.
Thank you so much, and apologies to those whose questions we could not get to. There were a lot of questions, which means there's a lot of interest in this topic. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Maahaay, Dr. Menkhaus. Thank you, Ambassador Ray. Excellent discussion. And I think we have to do another session on this, given the high level of interest and the unanswered questions. So thank you. All the best to you. And thank you again for joining us. And please do consider supporting us. Goodbye.
Thank you.